When I first started off with the being a journalist, it was like I knew I had to do something. I knew I had to start writing about something. I'd been really worried about writing. It took like a sort of like crisis point, a bad reaction to drugs, being a drug addict, really, and then it led to like a 3 month mushroom binge of epic proportions to kind of reset my whole mind. It was the other alternative was doing something really bad, and before I'd always known that I had to start writing. I tried so many times, and this is the same for loads of people who try and write. You write a paragraph or a page. You write. You get bored very quickly, and you go off and you write a paragraph or a page, and you're trying to find something you want to write about. And I never knew what I wanted to write about. I knew that eventually that I had been researching for years, and I realized that, and it was a revelation to discover that things that I knew other people didn't know. They just didn't know him, and that on some things no one knew them. And that seemed like really bizarre to me. I found information which said, "Well, why aren't people talking about that? No one's talking about it because I found the information." But I couldn't really realize it for probably about 2 years, like from the time where I did like the sort of mushroom hiatus from life and came back being like, right, I am so ready for a lot of this, but I was still deep in drug addiction. I had someone in my life who was feeding me morphine by that point. So, it was pretty clear that I was going down a path where I was like lots of people with drugs. I was trying to kill myself in some way. But that sort of, that time on mushrooms, I kind of said, right, you've got to get over this, or I'm going to write a paragraph and I can't get further than that. You've got to go like deeper than that. You've got to find something you really want to write about. And it was like, it ended up being something I was watching news, BBC probably, and Laura Kuenssberg come up. And I had already said, okay, I'm going to start writing. And then I was looking for something to write about, and she came up. And she was the chief correspondent for the BBC, and she was feeding a load of lies about Jeremy Corbyn. And I, of course, had been fed whatever. So I believed I was on the one side of the spectrum. I was like totally left. I was Mr. Lefty Lulu. And everybody around me was eating themselves all the fucking time. It's like, that's what the left is like. You hang around with a load of people who devour each other's souls, who just take away everything you want to do all the time, belittle it, make yourself part of this sort of unit which is always crumbling and always hates itself and is always self-hating.
Because you're holding two different opposing views against yourself.
Yeah. So I had come out of that, and I come out of that now. But back then, I was stuck in it. I was really stuck in it, and I believed that Laura Kuenssberg is obviously a plant. It was the first time really that I had said to myself, "Oh, there you go. There's someone that I can say is like being put in somehow to do that job. And we're supposed to have a TV license. So I got purchased in this. We pay our TV license in the UK. That means that the BBC and the BBC News should be unbiased reporting. And that's something the taxpayer is paying for. And so it gives you some sort of purchase. That gave me some sort of purchase, and I didn't know what to do. So what? Sorry, I got my cat in here. I do apologize. I didn't know what to do about the whole idea of Laura Kuenssberg. What had she ever done wrong? She's just being like against my candidate, against my guy. But she's so nefarious, I should look into her and I should see if I find anything. So I started off on the idea of just looking on Wikipedia, looking at a couple of articles, watching a couple of her videos and being like, okay, there's something there. What about if I just map out her life and find out something about her like father and mother and see if there's anything else there, because every time I dig away there's always something worse and something weird out there. And then I found out her father run a sweatshop in Peru, and managed to get a special permission to continue treating his workers like slave, even when reforms came in for the rest of the country. Only his factory was exempt. Then I found out her granddad was Eckhard von Kuenssberg, who went to a very famous Schloss, school for the elite, in Uberschrobie. Sorry, now my cat's puking on the floor. So, hey, man, my life. No, I just got to remember it's safe when I'm on the way out and clean it up. Oh my God, what can you do? A cat shouldn't be in the studio, they say, and it's right. She shouldn't be in the studio. But I found her in a dumpster, and she's the most awful creature around. But yeah, Eckhard von Kuenssberg had helped form the NHS right at the start, being one of the main people behind it. He was really high up, and I was like, wow, there's all of this story back there. And I'll just do that. I did a heritage of sweatshops, something in a silver spoon. I just did a classic hit piece article. Went after Laura Kuenssberg. I'll show you, Laura. You don't like Jeremy Corbyn. I'll show you. I'm a taxpayer. And I went out and I puffed out my chest. And it wasn't. It was a really good article, and loads of people read it. All I did was a really simple thing, which I've explained to people over and over again. What I do as a technique, and what I started developing there is I didn't realize I was developing it. It took a couple of articles and a couple of tries to work out what I was developing. But all it is simply you get all of the information, you put it down in chronological order. You try and take away most of your bias. You just try and find as much information about someone and their ancestry a little bit, and then you put it down in all chronological order, and a story emerges, whether you like it or not, and that story is called The Truth. And then you go, wow, oh my God, the truth. There you go. That's how you find the truth. Oh, that cat is back. I'm so sorry for my cat. She's good. Well, listen though, if she starts puking again, I'll lift her up. We can have a viral moment, so we'll be happy. Yeah.
This is the most laid back thing. You don't even gotta worry, dude. I got a cat that loves to eat her food too fast, and she'll start trying to puke. So I gotta pick her up from the living room and rush her into the kitchen.
Yeah. Well, this one is definitely a problem. She is a Hitler cat. So people say tuxedo, but she really is a Hitler cat, and she is also an idiot, the most idiotic animal I've ever come across. I'm campaigning to have her put down. That's what I think should happen. Get off me! Leave me alone! No, I don't mean it at all. Found her in a dumpster with little burnt whiskers, and I fell in love with her, and she was beautiful, and she's caused me nothing but pain and anguish for the rest of the time, which is what these creatures often do. But yeah, I'd gone through that journey with Laura Kuenssberg. I had, discovered that I had an ability to find things from the past. That I'm really good at looking looking at things that don't seem right. Now that's real. That's the crux. That's what changed from me writing 500 words that were meaningless to writing 1,000 to 2,000 words that had loads of meaning at the start. That's where, that was the jump. The jump was realizing that I had a skill that I could put down in a format, that format was going through family history of somebody, and that really spurred me on for the next part, because one of the next the first big article, because the Laura Kuenssberg article got read by tens of thousands of people, and for me, a nobody with zero basically following on social media, or people know that I'm a writer or anything, that was really interesting. I would I remember one guy reposted it on his site, which I was like, oh my god, that's amazing, and he had made a picture, and I used the picture for the original. I asked the finger, and the guy had to go at me for using it, and I said, oh, I'm sorry, I thought you wouldn't mind because you were reprinting my article, and I felt really yeah, and he was like, oh my god, it's you, oh my god, I'm so sorry, yeah, please use it, and then I was like, all right, okay, so people are all right to work with me as well, because I thought that everybody would hate me and hate what I do. You know, I was well aware that I wasn't going to be making any friends with where I was going to go with this, and I expected that backlash to come. So the second piece was Theresa May's father, like the second main piece that I did, and that within a week had almost 250,000 people reading it, and that was just before election time. Theresa May was going up against Jeremy Corbyn. I was like, am I gonna? This is it. This what I'm saying was different. What was different was that feeling that I could see that there was something wrong with somebody, with how they acted. It was off. Didn't make sense. So because that didn't make sense, I got to really examine it. And whenever I examine something like that, it always turns out to have some sort of basis that I wasn't expecting to find that makes for an interesting story. So I've just got to be able to identify the fact that I have that feeling. And, loads of people, the hunch, whatever people want to call it, it is throughout journalistic history there. And I knew that I had the hunch. I had the ability to get just to know that something smells off. Like I'm looking into Theresa May's Wikipedia trying to work out what I was doing at this point, because I wrote an article. One of the first articles I wrote included an article about Wikipedia, because I had discovered that the Wikipedia history was brilliant, because all the things that were taken off Wikipedia. So everything you want to hide on Wikipedia is in the history and has been taken off, and you can go and have a look at it and be like, ooh, that's interesting, isn't it? I'll follow that down. And then you find out it's either true or it's just someone making up lies or rumors after investigating. So it was a really good place to find sort of information, and I had been using it that way. And I'd looked for Theresa May's father. So Wikipedia is also a useful tool because you're looking at the official story, the official narrative. That's what they're painting it as. Loads of people say, oh, I'll never use Wikipedia. Then you haven't got the understanding of what you've got to understand, what they see the world as and what they want you to see the world as, and not be taken in by it. Of course, you don't have to use it as a definite source for everything, but a lot of what's on, 5% of what's on Wikipedia is probably pretty bloody accurate as well. So it's mixed up. You've got to learn to be able to differentiate. So going through the history, I'd found loads of different things, but there was nothing about her father, and I was like, that's really bizarre, because she's about to become she's a prime minister. She's about to be elected as prime minister in this election as well. And surely we should know who her father is, more about him. And then I discovered there had been a Wikipedia page under her father's name. I typed in Wikipedia and then put her father's name with the underscore in between to see if I could find it. And there he was. It was a page within the archives, an archive.org, showing that he had once had a page. And I looked at it, and this tiny little thing on the corner which showed all of the places he had been as a priest. His name was Hubert Brazier, and he had been a priest. And one of the places was Eastbourne Hospital. Now, I went through each of these places and went through the newspapers for that time of the year and wanted to see if I could find anything that had happened or notable that included Hubert Brazier or included his role. And I was thinking, I'm not going to find that much. I found loads and loads and loads, but Eastbourne Hospital was the thing that was like, wow, I have found something special, because Eastbourne Hospital, while he was there, was when John Bodkin Adams was murdering people at Eastbourne Hospital. He murdered 130 people. He had over 130. He had one of the most famous, he got off with it. He's one of the most famous serial killers in history. There's no dispute what he did.
What year was that, if you don't mind? Just for
This was all through the through the 50s. Really, was John Bodkin Adams. So by this point, I would think it's probably about 1950s, somewhere between 1952 and 1957. I failed to
Okay,
remember.
I just wanted a general time, just in case some people are paying attention and they don't know.
Oh, go read. Honestly, there's been movies made about John Bodkin Adams. He used to have people sign him into their will, and then he'd give them a lethal injection, and they die, and he'd take all their money. He did it over 130 times. So there's a paper trail, a really big paper trail of wills, and they ended up giving him a slap on the wrist for falsifying prescriptions because he was having an affair with a guy called Lord Gwyn, and so it was all covered up. Actually, everybody in the hospital at the time, in Eastbourne Hospital, already knew what he was doing, and they didn't want to rock the boat because the NHS had just been created and they didn't want any scandals in the NHS, so they all went into cover-up mode. Now, who was the chaplain, the main chaplain of Eastbourne Hospital, when people were going last rites, meeting the family, lying to them over and over again, would be Hubert Brazier, the father of Theresa May. That was unbelievable for me. I was like, he worked alongside John Bodkin Adams. Then what happened afterwards? Well, Bodkin Adams things get hushed hush. He gets put in a small diocese for a little bit, and then gets put into the heart of the establishment up in Oxford, the vicar of Haythrop and Enstone, and it's like where all of the top establishment go, and he was there. He made it up to the top of his ladder, like rewarded for his silence. Probably we can think that.
Right.
Time, Theresa May, while she was Home Secretary or wherever she was covering up the child sexual abuse, which also was happening during the diocese of her of Sussex. Mainly, there was a lot of, not mainly, but a lot of activity of paedophile priests in that area during the time that her father was also there, mixing with all of these people. It's just an extraordinary story, and it made me realize, okay, I got something. I can go forward now. I don't know what I'm going to do, but I'm going to keep looking for things to give me. And I got distracted on cases I shouldn't have got distracted on. And I got obsessed with people I shouldn't have got obsessed with. And, there's all of these pitfalls along the way where you realize, oh, that's more trouble than it's worth, because it's worth nothing. And there's all of these other stories that are really massively important to tell. And then eventually I came across Younkerman, and that was a bit of a game changer. That's when I knew things were going to go up a pace. I was entering into the Epstein investigation circle in 2019, in July 2019. So I was about to expose a woman who was very rich and powerful in Europe, had business based in the UK, was getting involved in the UK NHS Health Tech Advisory Board, which is all about the introduction of new technology into the NHS. Again, public service. So, it very much, that's the type of thing that within that time frame was emoting me. I was like, oh, that NHS, which is so important to us. Yeah, in a sense, they saved my life. They could have diagnosed me for the 13 years before they did eventually diagnose me, when I had really bad, like, thyroid. I had something called Graves' disease, and they waited until I was like 8.5 stone before saying, oh yeah, you've got a thyroid disease. I was presenting all the symptoms for years, 13, 14 years. So I had a reason to love the NHS, because they gave me radioactive treatment, really loads of chemicals, and then cut out my thyroids. That's kind of the mental state I was in. But where in actual fact I was going to end up being disgruntled with the NHS, but I felt like it was something to defend. It's another, you have to have some sort of a place to die, cross to die on, and so that was really going to be an important article, and did turn out to be an important article. But it was scary, because it was like, I knew the day before I put that up, like, shit was going to change in my life. My life was going to change, and it did.
So you knew going into that one that it was okay.
I had a terrible sleepless night beforehand. I'm like literally up till the early hours of the morning, could not sleep at all. Really rare for me at that point. I really sleep well, even under loads of stress and pressure. I tend to get a good sleep. I'm good with that. But that was just like, I remember just thinking constantly, when I do this, this is going to change things. I know, I'm showing that she's involved in some of the biggest scandals of the past, and that she was she was on Epstein's flight manifest twice, and in a business with Ehud Barak and with Pinchas Bukris and a load of IDF people that was all about total surveillance, and she was involved in the NHS, and she was involved in FIFA football corruption. And all of these different things, and it was a really bizarre moment to think that I'm going to enter into this sort of area, because I was really comfortable with these, like, looking for British based issues. But this was like international, and this was entering into the Epstein case, when it was really, that's when it was then it was going to kick off. I'd already been watching the Epstein case for years and years. Like I say before, I used to investigate and research, but I never used to publish anything. I didn't know I was doing it. I didn't know it was anything special, so I was just doing it. But by that time, I knew what I was doing was. I mean, the article was really good. I'd written the article and looked at it and gone, holy hell, that's a really good article, and it's remained extremely popular. And it was followed up the next month by the account. I was contacted by someone after I wrote the initial article. I can't name sources, and everything's peculiar when you enter into the Epstein case. Everything gets murky. But I went into finding out some information about her meeting in the UK in 2002 with Epstein when they flew on the flight manifest. They flew from Paris to Birmingham Airport. Why Birmingham Airport? I was puzzling over that for ages, and then I discovered that they went to Foxcote House, which was owned by Les Wexner. But they met two sitting senators, and it was just before the Iraq War vote, but also 3 days before the new Senate was going to open. And the first bill was about child trafficking. It was the Amber Alert bill that was being put through by Hillary Clinton. So there was loads of these amazingly weird sort of things that linked up that made loads of sense about that. And Wexner's war on terrorism and the Luntz-Wexner analysis, and how they had written up that, basically we've got to align any action that happens in Iraq with its support Israel has for the American policies, for when that we need to call that back in with America. We should use women in the media more, so that people, could pull at people's heartstrings and stuff. Luntz-Wexner analysis is crazy. But that was the second article in Young Common. So it was just learning about all of these horrible, nefarious people and how they work. But then I was suddenly inside on the second article, and I was seeing something that no one else had seen, and I felt like I was really lucky. But I didn't realize, these are all, now I've experienced this where people come and approach me over and over. A load of it you can't trust at all. There's disinfo all over the place. I have
discredit you, right? Give you some bullshit, you run with it, and then they're like, see, he's a fucking nut.
Yeah, there's that, but there's also, they want to incriminate you, so they want you taking things that you can't use and then showing that to the world and getting in trouble, like Assange gets in trouble as well. I've had an element of that where someone gave me something which would be illegal for me to publish in America for sure, and wasn't even worth it. That's the thing, is that if I was greedy for attention, then maybe I'd want to put it up, but it wasn't even worth it. People, they got a problem with me, and I've had loads of attempts to. I won't get into all of the things. Some of it's a bit personal, but some of it's a bit like hard. I've had a crazy few years where I've had people, try and get into my life from all different realms for all different reasons. Some of them are really positive, some of them are really kind, some of them really want to help me to do this better, so they want me to investigate certain things, want me to focus on certain things. Some want to drive me away from the truth, some want to destroy me, some want me to burn, some want me dead. There is a really, there's there's a spectrum of stuff that's happened since sort of like the earlier moments. But I went through I went through quite a transition from. I was a blundering. I was working for the first articles I was explaining to you about there. I'm working behind a reception desk in a 2-star hotel. It's got like 50 something rooms. I'm doing all of the jobs around the place, doing them quickly as possible, and then getting behind the reception desk and researching and writing articles so that I can like keep improving on this. And it kept working like that. But my life went to like going around the world a bit, writing some of the most important work that I could possibly ever write, and keeping this thing. This is what I was going to say. It's really hard to co-opt me. It's really hard to get me, because I'm not interested in writing what someone else wants me to write. Hate that. It doesn't work for me. It has to be a point. There has to be a point. The reason why I had done the Laura Kuenssberg articles, because I felt some sort of like anger about her being supposedly unbiased, and she was actually biased. For the Theresa May article, I was like, I'm supporting Corbyn in the election. How do I do this best? Well, I do what I do. I feel that hunch that there's something wrong with this woman and her backstory. I look into it, and then I find something. That means when, like, with the Schwab articles, there was a big piece of, it's obvious, it's a big piece of missing information in his backstory, and I know that if I look into it, I will be able to fill up that vacuum with information that is sourced up the wazoo. I mean, when I wrote Schwab Family Values, I sourced it up the wazoo. And I looked for I did this. I started to develop like the ideas of what I think the strength of evidence you need to have to include things within an article should be. I started to develop a real sense of that there has to be mostly you can put it down to simple rules. So you can say that there's 3 points of source material for something that's really important, and one of them has got to be super good. So like with his father, I had heard one place where a mention of a name, but not sure if he could be trying to put people off. Don't really know. And one of the sources was a legal documentation when they were trying to, I think they were trying to get from back Swiss nationality. His father was trying to get back Swiss nationality because his is very complicated, but Schwab's grandfather had once given away his German nationality to marry a Swiss woman, but then moved back from Switzerland to Germany afterwards and had to renounce his Swiss citizenship. They wanted to take that up after the war because, well, working with the Nazis wasn't something that people really liked in the 50s, you know? By that point, if you had worked with the Nazis, you were risking that you could be held accountable. You just watched, Nuremberg happen, and you're just like, okay, maybe I should be a little bit careful now. So his father was trying to get Swiss nationality back, and that means it came up in the court records, and in there is Klaus Martin Schwab, Urs Heine Schwab, his brother, Erika Neher Precht, Schwab, who's his mother, and Eugen Schwab, who's his father. And that was like, that's the best piece of evidence. That was like that. I can't even remember how I found it, because it wasn't under the search. It wasn't a place where you could search for it. It was just searching for document after document of anything to do with Schwab. Anything. I couldn't even go backwards. I couldn't follow the line backwards because there's no line to follow backwards. I had to go back in time, find every single Schwab, and there's a place called Schwabia, so that's a bit hard. Every single person called Schwab, and then follow their lines forward instead. That seemed to make much more sense. That allowed me to discount loads of people. That also makes you kind of like, it's a long process to do all of that. I had to look at all of the different times Schwabs are mentioned in newspaper archives. The Swiss newspaper archives, I was deep down, right up inside the Swiss newspaper archives throughout the whole thing. And I tell you, it's a weird place to be. It looks different. The writing's different. I got to do a lot of translating all the bloody time, and it's not necessarily fun. But eventually, these things yield little different bits of evidence here and there that back up the story. Even after I finished writing the story, I'd left out a little bit because Klaus Schwab's father was actually married before he had married Klaus Schwab's mother to a Jewish lady as well, who ended up and Klaus Schwab had half brothers and half sisters from that relationship. So there was still a little bit more that I could have found after that. But what I did find was what I do all of the time. Once I identified his father with enough evidence, then I went on through. It's like once you overcome the hard bit, then you find all of the information. There's loads of information all of a sudden. It just goes. It just yeah. Every single time. Once I found out where Hubert Brazier had been in Eastbourne Hospital, it moved really fast. Once I'd worked out Eckhart von Kuenssberg with Youngkerman, as soon as I had discovered like her name was like she had travelled alone with Jeffrey Epstein on Lolita Express. He always travelled with his entourage. It was only one of two times on the flight manifest that you had where you saw that behavior happen. Jeffrey Epstein fly with someone that's outside his entourage. It made no sense. And then once I investigated, it just like falls out. So you've got to like break that moment where a case falls in front of you, and discovering who Eugene Schwab was and how he was the head of a Nazi model company that was central to the atomic bomb program for the Nazis was just wild. To find out, to follow Klaus Martin Schwab along, and to find out that he then went on later on in this 1967, left Harvard and went to Escher Weiss, his father's own company, to merge it with Schulze Escher Weiss, and then they were going to sell weapons illegally to the apartheid South African regime, nuclear weapons technology, and that was fundamentally to do with Klaus Schwab as well. He followed in his father's footsteps. The most horrible racist regimes supplied by with nuclear technology for nuclear warfare by the Schwabs, old Papa Schwab and old Schwab Jr. And so this that sort of adventure, that was just wild. That was just like, wow, man. You just tell the story. You tell the story and it unfolds in front of you. And the only, people get distracted on it. Maybe some people would have only got to the point of the Nazis and only concentrated on that in the story. But my articles tend to be like much longer, like double length than most people's articles. So that first one's probably about 7,500 words, and that's probably about 2 articles worth of stuff. And the first part is really about Nazi Germany and stuff, and then it's about Klaus Schwab's own doing the same with his father's company, and then the Club of Rome and that sort of stuff. And I just This has all been an adventure. The second article in that series, another adventure. A year of me walking around, wondering how the hell I was going to follow up something like Schwab Family Values. You know, I wrote other articles in between, but that article was like, there has to be a second part to it. It didn't feel like it was ended. And I spent a lot of time wondering where the next part of it was. And I thought it was just like creation of the World Economic Forum. That's it. The World Economic Forum has been created and everybody goes on, yada, yada, yada. And I'm going to look into that and it'll be really easy. But just the hunch wasn't there, man. Just the hunch, is like, I'm not there yet was the hunch. I spent a load of time walking around and then one day I was just like, right, I've got to really look into this Kissinger's International Seminar. That's the main thing. And the giants, Hugh Wilford is someone who had covered Kissinger's International Seminar, but other people. But the first time I came across it properly, that I understood something was going on, and was beautiful, was New York Times archives, and I found Kissinger's International Seminar in 1967 outed as being funded as by the CIA via different conduits, and I was like, "What? That sounds brilliant." Okay, look into that a little bit, and that was Klaus Schwab's course. That was the course he was on. That's where he was tutored. Not only that, 1967, when it's outed, is the year he's leaving Kissinger's International Seminar. So he's like there definitely while it's being revealed as being a CIA-funded program, and that just then again. Like I say, as soon as that happened, everything else came afterwards. Henry Kissinger, of course, I'm going to have to just look at Henry Kissinger, and then it comes up Herman Kahn and John Kenneth Galbraith are the people who Kissinger give to Klaus Schwab to go back and form the World Economic Forum. Now, the first thing he does when he gets back from Harvard is do the Schulze-Escher-Weiss merger, and then he goes on to do the other stuff afterwards. So he starts really working on it in 1968, 1969. They're trying to convince people to get on board. They're bringing on loads of other people who are getting on board, and it's a bunch of Malthusians all ready to go into the next stage of what, their nefarious plans and create an organization that was, that rumbling of the Kissinger's International Seminar was a series of events for the CIA. The feminist movement had always also been corrupted by Gloria Steinem, and she had helped the CIA corrupt the youth movements. We've been involved in the Vienna Youth Festival with her, I think it's the ICI, and onwards. Gloria Steinem was constantly involved in CIA operations, and she had also been based at Harvard at some time, and Ramparts magazine was also going to do an article on them, so they had to get out in front of it, just like Harvard did with Humphrey Dorman and admit about Kissinger's International Seminar. It's like, that series of events led to them being like, okay, now we've got to go underground to a certain extent. We can no longer do a leadership seminar where we train leaders, because Kissinger's International Seminar, if you don't know what it is, it was made in 1951. It was kind of like it was the practice runs of it, and Kissinger said it should have been called Yandell Elliott's International Seminar after Yandell Elliott, who was an extremely famous guy who was one of the many mentors of Henry Kissinger, because it was his idea, and he was very much a CFR boy as well. But Kissinger's International Seminar was about training up leadership candidates so they could be installed in CIA coups. So the first coups were 1952 and 1953 for the CIA with Egypt and Iran, with King Farouk and Mohammad Mossadegh respectively, and so they were starting to train their leaders in 50 and 51 to try and get it so they could find leaders they could install into these countries as they do coup after coup in an attempt to make sure everybody's American lined so that the Soviets can't be able to gain any type of purchase socially or culturally into any of these countries. So they're obviously, I mean, it's an extremely like naive project as well. How they roll it out, because there was no way that in the Egypt they had to install someone who was like going to turn to the Russians in no time whatsoever, and they didn't have enough time to train people up. But the leadership courses were meant for that, and the World Economic Forum, I think, was with that idea in mind. We're going to create a place where we can not only create policy that could be incorporated to make our multipolar globalist agenda come to fruition, but we're also going to create leadership courses and leaders that will then be installed politically by just the paradigm itself. If every leadership candidate is trained through one order, then they are the winner, and they are the winner in that sense. And of course, I went on with that series to the third and fourth part, which kind of goes through those things and shows that in 2004, when they reformed the Young Global Leaders in 2004, it was actually Henry Kissinger on the board of the Dan David Foundation, while they gave $1 million prize to Klaus Schwab, which he said, I'm going to use to create the Young Global Leader program. So it's just a continue of Kissinger's plan, and then the fourth part was about German Marshall Fund and Guido Goldman, and that's kind of a different type of leadership group they do, but they just out and out CIA. They don't care anymore. They opened up that place. It was like the Rockefellers turn up to the opening, like David Rockefeller turns up to the opening, and other people who were just like the top elite of the New World Order. And they were all like, yeah, let's take pictures together, gang. Now we're just balls out gonna take over the world. And it's quite fantastic. I'm probably about a month away from releasing a 2.5 part of that series, which goes through Benazir Bhutto and Zulfikar Ali Bhutto. Benazir Bhutto, of course, ends up in Harvard after the outing of Kissinger's international seminar, and her father, Zulfikar Ali Bhutto, says to his old friend John Kenneth Galbraith, "Hey, can you look after my daughter while she's at Harvard?" He puts his son in charge. And of course, Benazir Bhutto serves, I think she does the same as, I can't remember if her father served twice. I think he might have served twice as Prime Minister of Pakistan. But Benazir Bhutto, of course, murdered eventually. And that story's another wild story. When you follow the New World Order, at some point, you don't need to have hunches, because you're on a stream of data no one else is on, and every single next step of that stream is going to be a nefarious bastard doing nefarious things all of the time, within a group that's definable. You can work out their neighbors, and you can go and look at what they do, and you'll be like, oh man, they're all in this like big party boat. They're all in this big party boat, and they're all benefiting from it. So man, that's me kind of like, I of course, the Epstein articles, I've done loads. I've done an Epstein series. I helped with researching and wrote a couple of bits for One Nation Under Blackmail. And
it was Whitney Webb, right?
Yeah. We have a baby together, but we're not together. It's very complicated. I don't really want to stop on that too long, because that's all personal stuff. But I did, like from that, I wrote the series that was really kind of like Epstein 101, where I tried to explain what was really going on with the child trafficking and the plane and what people were using it for, because I needed to investigate for myself and map it out in greater detail. And when I did, it's kind of like you see that there's more going on that there's a load of things that don't make sense. There was a load of issues that led on to more as well, with the Pottinger series. And the Pottinger series, I think, is like, it's my favorite articles that I've written so far, because it just, he was John Stanley Pottinger. I came onto his he came onto my radar because he was in a relationship with a woman called Maria Farmer, who was one of the supposed Epstein victims. Still goes on other people's shows and still talks about this sort of stuff, often tries to get people to delete the shows straight afterwards, which is maybe a little bit of an alarm bell. But she had done a few things which were a little bit, she had tried to seed someone into the Unlimited Hangout podcast, and Whitney Webb asked me to check out this guy and verify him to make sure that there was nothing wrong. And there was everything wrong. He had 8 different identities, and he had served like loads of time in prison, and he wasn't the person he said he was at all. He'd actually run like a low down kind of sex compromise sort of operation, really low down, like models come in and they would get bribed because they took naughty pictures or whatever, but they weren't underage girls or anything. So that got really confusing, and that led me to question large parts of the Epstein case. What separates me from a lot of the people on the Epstein case probably happened as a genesis, like started around there. So this is one thing that a lot of people don't know. I mean, there's a lot of people who research Epstein, and the majority of them say he's simply Mossad. It's only Mossad. Look at all this evidence of links to Israel. But it's just not realistic when you look at. I see him as a CIA interlocutor, that he brought in Mossad, he brought in UK intelligence. Prince Andrew was working as a main arms dealer for the UK. Of course, he was bringing in Mossad agents as well, and he was bringing in Canadian agents and French agents, and it didn't make no difference where these agents were from. If they needed to work with the CIA, they would go through one of their guys, and he would link them up with other people. Now, realizing that he's working on American soil domestically as CIA means that you should be able to have congressional hearings and Senate testimony and all of that, but you're not going to get any of that if he's the Mossad. And that's really the crux of what makes me different to a lot of other people, is that I realize that a lot of this is CIA. It doesn't make any sense why people keep being, and I start calling it Mossad absolutism. They say it's all about the Mossad, or I won't listen to your arguments at all. I won't look at the evidence unless it all points at the Mossad. That's programming. That's the same sort of programming. Does not make any sense. And really was the John Stanley Pottinger sort of articles. I mean, he's literally in bed with Gloria Steinem, who lots of people say has a lot of links with Israel in many different ways, and extremely supportive of what a lot of us would term the Zionist agenda. But John Stanley Pottinger was just like just didn't make any sense to me. It was amazing. It was just like going down a rabbit hole that was unbelievable. I had tried to work out why Maria Farmer had told me a lie, and when she had tried to seed in this guy into the podcast, and why she was trying to seemingly undermine loads of different platforms by getting this guy to appear on all of these things. And then it made me question who she was. And then someone who was related to one of the Stephen Hoffenberg, who was one of the guy who went down for one of his and Epstein's crimes with Towers Financial. One of his family got in contact contact with me and was like, basically, just out of the blue, this started happening. It happens in my life now quite regularly, in actual fact, that weird people get in contact with me and start taking seeding shit into my mind. And I'm like, yeah, all right. I mean, to all those people who decide to do that, this ain't my first rodeo. And sometimes I'm really like, I'm willing to hear everybody out, but I will also call bullshit when I smell bullshit. And and there was lots of bullshit. I was actually working with a woman. I really regret involving this other woman because I liked her so much. She was so honest. She was such a nice person. And I'd been working with this woman, and I was like, I don't trust this Hoffenberg girl, of course. Can you help me suss it out a little bit? She eventually got spooked out because things started happening. She got calls in the middle of the night and stuff like that. And I shouldn't have asked her to help out. I should have just dealt with it myself. But she was trying to just keep me looking elsewhere, keep me looking at Kirby Summers, keep me looking at other things. But I was like, no, man, no, I gotta look elsewhere. I gotta find out what this whole thing is with this. But what's Maria Farmer been up to? She was in hiding for 25 years, was she? I don't believe it. And there was people who were trying their best to stop me from investigating that. And I was like, oh man, my hunch is like screaming blue murder. There is something wrong with all this. Everything was like against it, and then really one of the big things. I mean, finding out she was never in hiding, that she was advertising her work on Facebook, she was tagging in Eileen Guggenheim on Twitter. She was in the time that she's meant to be in peak hiding from Eileen Guggenheim. She was exhibiting her work in the Take Home a Nude 2006 or 2007, where Eileen Guggenheim was one of the people who were evaluating this stuff, and Vicky Ward, who she had to go in hiding from, was also one of the judges, and it just didn't make any sense. It was like, okay, this is all a big lie. And then I found out she had been in 2 companies in 2017. And I got to say, 2017 is a massive year for the Epstein case that no one talks about, because that's when I think the case to take down Jeffrey Epstein started, or the whole, that's when they decided we need to kill him. He needs to be taken out of the picture, and we need to have a managed takedown of all of this. I think that's it. It started rumbling in about 2013. Reintroduction of Virginia Giuffre into the case. That was the initial start. The co-opting of that case by members of the CIA, that was also there. But the 2017 was really where the operation began, I believe, and there's loads of evidence to that. I believe that I can present in a 4th part of the Pottinger series, because I wrote 3 parts, and I had traced this one company to Twin Lakes Road in South Salem, and Maria Farmer's registered down there in a business, and she's not in hiding. She's in the business. Who she's in the business with? All the lawyers for the Epstein victims. That doesn't make any sense. She was in hiding, and she was literally working for the lawyers. Wait a minute, doesn't that conflict that she suddenly makes a witness statement in April 2019, 2 years after? This doesn't make any sense, and I'm already suspicious by the fact she tried to seed a complete fraud into the case, to undermine my own voice, undermine Unlimited Hangout. The whole thing was just, and she'd already done it in loads. Obviously, I had to investigate this, and there was a load of different people who were there, but the house was registered as being owned by John Stanley Pottinger, one of the lead lawyers for the Epstein victims, and that was just the start of a wild. It all happened. Like I said, okay, I went and looked into him, and I discovered a load of stuff straight away, and I was like, this can't be true. This is like the biggest story I could ever come across in my life. There is nothing, however much, there was nothing as big as this story. It is so important. It's just there in front of me, and no one's going to touch it because no one has like. I don't know. Because I can't. There's certain things I can't quite say about my experience with different things. I would say that rabbit hole had been gone down and ignored by multiple people, but I can't take on that fight at the moment to explain what I mean by that. So what I will say is that if I knew I had to look into John Stanley Pottinger. I had to understand who he was. And the first part, the Pottinger, I ended up writing the Pottinger Identity, the Pottinger Supremacy, and the Pottinger Ultimatum, of course, because it seemed, and the Pottinger Legacy will follow, and make sense. Every part of it made sense, including the fake or the amnesia. You know, Bourne gets amnesia. Oh yeah, that happens within the Pottinger identity as well. But his Pottinger's brother gets amnesia, David Pottinger, after he traffics underage girl across state lines for sex in 1962. I mean, that's amazing. The whole thing was amazing. Yeah, I went back. I researched his father. I did the standard. You know, my standard model. I take all of the information, I put it in chronological order, and I see what comes up at the end of it. And the first part was like John Stanley Pottinger, John Pottinger, his father, was head of an insurance company in Dayton, Ohio. He was a 32nd or 33rd degree Mason. He was Scottish Rites. He was Bohemian Grover. He was all of the things you can imagine. He was the head of the heads of the commissions and all of this nonsense. And he has these kids, 3 kids. I only covered 2 of them. The other one's very interesting as well, but it wasn't necessary for the story. David Forbes Pottinger and John Stanley Pottinger. And David Forbes Pottinger would eventually, once his father died, to continue in his career being a city commissioner like his father had been doing before, while he died. John Stanley Pottinger, he's amazing. He went to Harvard in 1958. I think he first turns up at Harvard. The same year his father dies, he goes for a tour. Before he goes on this tour with his father, he's already involved in really, really enormous, likely suspicious things. He's like the chief of everything. He's the head quarterback in school. He's the head of every single organization, like his father is. Every single school organization. He comes up in newspaper over and over again. John Stanley Pottinger over and over again. By the time he's at Harvard, he's being placed on all these different heads of different things, looking at the athletics program and everything, and they all love him completely. He goes around. One of the last things he did with his father is go around Russia. This is Soviet Russia, in a yacht, and comes back and gives speeches about what it's like behind the Iron Curtain. And it feels like he got recruited when he was about 16, 17, 18, like snuffled up by these recruitment programs that were recruiting young people for leadership programs, like in Harvard. And then he goes to Harvard. He was planning on going somewhere else, but then he ends up in Harvard during the time that Gloria Steinem actually gets installed at Harvard after being recruited by the CIA in India in 1958 when John Stanley Pottinger first turns up. By 1974, they become boyfriend and girlfriend. But at this point, I don't know if they know each other or John Stanley Pottinger is involved with her at all. But John Stanley Pottinger, he aces Harvard. He becomes a lawman, works for Broad, Curry and Schultz, does like one case, I think it is. And then suddenly he's in the State Department, lower level, 1969, under Nixon, 1970, boom. He's in the Department of Justice. He's a head of the Civil Rights division for segregation, going from place to place, forming his narrative. 1917 to 1973, you know, you're trying to fight for desegregation of schools and all of this stuff. He's a hero. You got to look at him. And then there they go. He's created his narrative. He's been the chief of chiefs. Now he's up there. He's like gets up to high levels in the Justice Department. He's like assistant attorney general or something. And what does he do? What does he do? He's central in covering up the assassination of Martin Luther King. Signs it off. No FBI collusion. I've looked at all the evidence, and why would I lie to you? He's central in covering up Watergate. He literally stays on a year extra into a Democrat reign under Jimmy Carter to finish signing off that. He interviews Helms himself. Helms, who was the director of the CIA for all of the Watergate burglary and a lot of the other things that were Weather Underground related stuff too. And he's instrumental in the state's official signing off of the story. He's involved in harassing the Native Americans of the American Indian movement after Wounded Knee. It's like Kent Frizzell and him deal with all of the negotiations over the standoff for Wounded Knee, and end up he is put in charge of just harassing the American Indian movement into non-existence afterwards. He is central to defending those, or trying to hold the National Guardsmen to account over Kent State. It's a really massively important moment in American history. He's involved in all of these massively important moments. He gets involved in the assassination of Orlando Letelier and the aftermath of that by being the man who takes Eugene Proper. Orlando Letelier was got blown up outside the Chilean embassy. He had once been the foreign ambassador for Chile under Salvador Allende. And then when Pinochet took over, he first got jailed and then he got moved out to a South American country and then moved to Washington and then blown up by Pinochet to outside the Chilean embassy in a car bomb to show how cool Pinochet was. And he was brutal. In Washington, D.C. itself, crazy move. And Eugene Proper's put in charge of investigating the case, and the first person who comes into his office through the side door is John Stanley Pottinger, who just happens to be best friends with George H.W. Bush, who just happens to have just been made head of the CIA, and they're buddies. Everybody's buddy. Takes Eugene Proper up to CIA headquarters and he says, "Hey, my friend George, how can we get around? How can we learn more about this Operation Condor and all of this mixed nations intelligence agencies?" This is what we have now with the big Western intelligence blob, is all of these intelligence agencies working together like Operation Condor was. They each take sanctions on each other's countries via conduits organized via conduits like Jeffrey Epstein, do the sanctions in different countries, and they can get away with it because it's no longer, oh, we didn't do that, it's these guys did that, oh well, all of those sort of things happen. They were really interested. And Stanley Pottinger is the man who goes back and gets it signed off for the CIA under George H.W. Bush to legally surveil domestically on Americans. Boom, pa-ching. That's how Stanley Pottinger is massively important. 1977, finished covering up Watergate like a boss, that's what he is. He's the boss of the Justice Department. He's the most corrupt man in Washington. He's the fix-it. He's a Winston Wolf. That's described by his own law partner, Bradley Edwards. He's a Winston Wolf. I think he actually says he thinks he's a Winston Wolf for the CIA, because he says over and over again that he thinks he's the CIA. Even his own law partner keeps saying over and over, and it just sorely looked like that. When he leaves office, he ends up going up to work in for private businesses who are trying to. The banking acts have come in 1970, but weren't enforced till 1976, and everybody was transferring their paper documents over to electronic equipment, and in doing so, everybody was finding out all these dirty skeletons in dirty closets, and so they were all finding out, all the secrets were all coming out, so they had to have these people like John Stanley Pottinger come in and organize the people to check everything and make sure, we won't enter that, and it was like basically compliance officers high-level compliance officers that organized legally this sort of thing. He also ended up defeating in court there's a hostile takeover of Mead Corporation, which was a forestry papers product or something along like creator or manufacturer, but the Arm and Hammer was attempting to take them over, and with Occidental Petroleum, and they were fighting it off, and John Stanley Pottinger leads the assault against Arm and Hammer. Arm and Hammer was using blackmail against people, was like a compromise agent. He was like some stories about him and like people walking in, and this is one that's come from John Stanley Pottinger, I think, originally, which is people walking in Russia, in Moscow, on Arm and Hammer in his underpants on the floor with 2 KGB agents above him. Like, he was a dirty man. John Stanley Pottinger went in and made Occidental Petroleum withdraw everything. He was the man. He could beat the top level guys. And straight afterwards, what's he doing? He's in his law firm. He's setting up a company. He's setting up a company with a guy called Cyrus Hashemi in 1980. He's also defending Gerald Bull, who's head of Space Research Corporation, who's smuggling weapons to some Angola, I think it is, to South Africa to fight Angola, because there's a civil war in Angola. It's going to be taken over by communist government. The CIA back up Gerald Bull to do all of this stuff. Gerald Bull gets caught, gets let off in Canada, but Americans tried to hold him to a little bit of account, and in comes Stanley Pottinger to defend him. Then, at the same time, Stanley Pottinger is central to organizing Iran-Contra and the October surprise. Central. Him and Cyrus Hashemi approached the CIA, and Stanley Pottinger approaches the CIA. He's already 1 foot in the door, isn't he? He's already the seat next to his. He's sitting on the knee of his good friend George H.W. Bush, and he's like, we can go and sort out this Iran hostage issue. We can, talk with them through back channels, and we can get things done. And we can also do it in a way that means the Republicans, yeah, you know them, can get into office, because Carter can't solve the Iranian hostage crisis. But look, George H.W. Bush and the Republicans can solve it. And so it was like important to keep the hostages held until the October surprise could happen. And the arms dealing that was going on behind with Iran-Contra included Jeffrey Epstein, Adnan Khashoggi, Cyrus Hashemi, and John Stanley Pottinger, sent to organizing Iran-Contra and smuggling the weapons to Iran. And this is during a time where later on, John Stanley Pottinger will admit, oh yes, I shared an office once with Jeffrey Epstein in a bank. Oh yes, did you? What you mean when you were organizing Iran-Contra, you dirty rotten bastard? And he's a dirty rotten John Stanley Pottinger. I hope you hear this one day. You're a dirty rotten bastard. And him and that is just unbelievable. Finding out that information and finding out that Rudy Giuliani himself is going to investigate in 1984. In 1984, so shit kicks off. I mean, John Stanley Pottinger is running around for the CIA all through the early 80s, obviously. Enjoying time in the limelight, meetings all around the world. Naughty boy. 1984, it turns out one of the federal agencies had been bugging Cyrus Hashemi's offices during the organizing of Iran-Contra. So they turns out they know everything. They go to indict all of these people who are involved in Iran-Contra. And Rudy Giuliani himself is the one who's to decide whether John Stanley Pottinger is going to be indicted. It's written in the newspapers. He's central to being involved. Everybody knows it. Oh, I'm going to check whether or not we're going to indict him. Now, in an X Space at the beginning of the year, I got to speak with Rudy Giuliani in the Epstein Files X Space, and I asked him, do you remember when you were meant to indict John Stanley Pottinger over Iran-Contra? Can you explain why you didn't? And he was like, oh, no, I can't remember at all. No, I don't remember that. No. But I actually managed Yeah, but you could tell by his, I could tell by the tone of his voice, by his manner that you gotta be like, he knows that was one of the things he had to let off the big guy, and of course he had to. He's George H.W. Bush's best friend and the most corrupt district. The Southern District of New York, the most corrupt police force possibly in the entire world, and a district for crime and for getting any type of like justice. That is where Rudy Giuliani is during that time, and that's where it's all being sorted out as always. I mean, that's where Epstein dies eventually as well. And by 1984, though, that means Partinger is like he's then breaking up with Steiner because Steinem's breaking up with him. I mean, she's doing CIA operations for years, decades. She's doing CIA. She's running this left-wing feminist scam for the CIA. He's running this right-wing Republican CIA, take over the world, manipulate Iran, manipulate like a coup on their own country. Get in Ronald Reagan and Bush via a scam. That's insane. He created a coup. He was central to organizing and creating a coup on America. That's how serious it is. That changes American history. That's just like that. Just following. I don't even need to do much to this. Just following Stanley Pottinger's history just leads you down this path where you get to see quite how corrupt he was, quite how awful he was, and quite how masterful he was. But by 1984, it's all coming out. Giuliani's wondering whether he should indict, and John Stanley Pottinger suddenly in Mexico with his sunglasses on, and he's hiding away, and he's like, "Oh no, I better keep low." Lays low for a while. Ken comes back in 1987. It's obviously safe. George H.W. Bush has taken power, in the White House. Comes back into it. He gets given like some sort of award by the Rockefeller Foundation. He's got these other. He joins a UN committee. He suddenly pulls out CIA stuff, but next level, like older retiree CIA stuff happens. And then in 1990, he reforms himself as a writer. He starts to create this. He's going to release his first book about 4 or 5 years later, but he creates himself as an author, and he buys this house and this is beautiful. In 1990, he's obviously he's all of the Iran Contra people are going to get pardoned by George H.W. Bush soon. So, and he's best friends with George H.W. Bush. George H.W. Bush is president. So he has no worries anymore. He's like, oh, now I can retire and write some books and be a nefarious bastard in secret and just use this as a cover. So settles down in his nefarious bastard life, and he buys a couple of homes. One is the Twin Lakes home that he ends up in, that I find that originally with the Maria Farmer stuff, the business is linked there, and then that leads to blah, 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 blah. But he's also buys one which is Island Drive. I can't remember if it's East Island Drive, but Island Drive home in Palm Beach. And when I found that out, I was like, I was looking through the newspaper archives. I found out he had bought it, and I followed all of the sales of it. And at the same time in 1990 that he's buying this house, there's another house for sale, originally with the same people. And it's in El Brillo Way. It's Jeffrey Epstein's House of Hell in Palm Beach. It's being sold by the same people. Eventually gets sold by Sotheby. And I was like, right, okay, so East Island Drive, which I think is what it is, where is it? How far away could it possibly be from Jeff? At this point, John Stanley Pottinger has already met Jeffrey Epstein and smuggled guns with him in Iran Contra, so they're probably pretty friendly. They've been hanging around in this very small cliquey network with the exactly the same people. John Stanley Potner is getting on the Bronfman parties with Gloria Steinem in 1983, 1984, I think it is, just before they break up. And Jeffrey Epstein's hanging around with exactly these same people. They know each other fully well. How far away do you think this house can be? And oh my God, 500 meters as the crow flies. I mean, that's insane. To find out that John Stanley Pottinger bought at the same time a house 500 meters away from Jeffrey Epstein was just like, that's insane. That's insane. He's the lead lawyer for Jeffrey Epstein's victims. So whatever I'm going to find going forward, this is already been the main man to cover up Watergate, Martin Luther King.
Why? Just to touch on that real quick, if you can, do you, or is this a part of your story? Why get something so close? You know, like, and at the same time, like, what is the purpose on that?
I don't know if I think there's only certain places in the world where intelligence can go, and they're like a community where there's loads of people who are either former intelligence or current intelligence who live within those communities. One of them is Palm Beach. There's a lot of them there. There's other places like in Portugal. You find it with when Madeleine McCann went missing, I was looking at Praia de Luz and the areas around it, and there's loads of intelligence agents who just seem to settle down in those areas. Loads of real dodgy people. So I get a feeling there's like these places that are kind of safe zones. So that could be part of it, but it's also part of it is that if you're looking for mansion houses, there's only a certain amount of places you can go. You're not going to go over to the crapper areas of Palm Beach and the slums. It's all going to be all these beachfront properties. But 500 meters apart seems like unbelievable, especially from the house of how they would have known each other. In between is Scott Michael, I think his name's Scott Michael Glazier, Todd Michael Glazier. In between is Tarpon Island, in between Stanley Pottinger's house and Jeffrey Epstein's Albrilla Way house, as the crow flies. And he's the guy who buys Epstein's house after Epstein kills himself, demolishes it, rebuilds it, and then sells it on. So there's all these sort of like weird links around the area. Like they all sort out their own messes as well. Robert F. Kennedy Jr. was round the house a load. It was reported by the gardener, and down. It's like one straight road from where the Kennedy compound was all the way down. So they, in a sense, they all got access to each other. They're all pretty close to each other. But I get a feeling, they're all in bed together. They're all in bed together.
Since you brought up Robert, what's your kind of take on like where do you stand on all that?
Oh, you do.
Was he kind of innocent, or is he got dirty hands? Like what's your opinion, or where's your work take you on that?
I think he's one of the dirtiest men around, and that people don't realize, especially the people, they're trying to model him as someone who's different from the rest. And that's the start of what they're doing, as a politician. He's different. It's Robert F. Kennedy. He's not like the Democrats. He's not like the Republicans now, but he's always like the Democrats. He supported the Clintons. He's been a lot like, in actual fact, his agenda's been always Malthusian. His environmental policies is about not getting nuclear power, so you don't have enough energy, and then you end up like with population reduction over time. I mean, he lines up with people like King Charles and Vandana Shiva, as shown by the Space Commune Boys. They released an Energy Empire, which is a documentary which shows how Vandana Shiva, King Charles, and Robert F. Kennedy Jr. have kind of co-opted the environmental movement and sort of terrorized people not to be involved. Every time you investigate Kennedy, you find something terrible in the closet every single time. I mean, he had drug problems when he was younger. He obviously had issues because his dad got shot in the and his uncle got shot in the head publicly. I mean, you're bound to have some issues. He had drug issues. and he went to Harvard, and he was at Harvard. He met a guy called Roger Ailes. If you've ever heard of that guy, who was caught wanking in a toilet while watching women on the toilet in Fox while he was the head of Fox. And I find it really interesting that he met Roger Ailes, and he went, and him and Roger Ailes took like a hiatus. I think it was for like a year, where they just went out on their own, just the two of them, filming about falconry or whatever, and going to look at rare birds. And it looked like a right Republican grooming exercise to make sure that they were in control of the next Kennedy. Looks so much like it. And then he sets up as the environmental movement. The environmental movement created by Morris Strong, Kissinger, and others, who were all creating this new movement that was going to be basically Malthusian and controlling the population, which is what then he's done with all of his legal stuff, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. And at the same time, he's in a relationship where he's cheating on his wife all of the time. And by the time he's hanging around with Epstein, he's rating how many the girls he's cheating on his wife with. So he's rating 37 sexual extramarital sexual affairs by like you would do when you were a teenager. I did that when I was a teenager. Yeah, two of my girlfriends found it it was a very, very very embarrassing moment, but you learn these things. He was doing it as an adult, so that's a bit like, it's a bit like, come on, man. Come on, you've obviously got some issues. But he had some big issues. He was hanging around with Epstein, and then he lied about it. He said he hung around with him. He's caught his plane twice. One was he was allowed to ferry him to somewhere. That makes no sense anyway. And another time was, they went fossil hunting, and they went there and they went back again a few days later, and there's a picture in between where they're attending a ball together. They're definitely not fossil hunting. They're out having a drink. They're on the same table, and it's like, oh, well, you've lied now. So if you've lied, this looks really. And then you look at all of the people surrounding you. Look at Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s son off in Ukraine doing what seems like deep state operations, of course, some sort of working, probably working for one of the agencies. That's what is I don't know if it's his stepdaughter or something. So some people have said who's is like one of his campaign managers is CIA background. So all of these people who are around Kennedy all reek of intelligence. His whole setup all reeks of intelligence. His family history doesn't only include the Kennedys. If you go back through his ancestry, it's the Kennedys on one side. On the other side is Prussian royalty. So you've got to realize that they create dynasties themselves, and then people abide by those dynasties afterwards. Robert F. Kennedy Jr. isn't what you think he is at all, or what most people think he is, or what most people create him as. And I think the Epstein thing is an issue for him, and I still think that one of the main reasons why Epstein was taken down was possibly to protect Kennedy Jr. and let him be an eventual candidate for presidency, because I think they looked down the line. You have to remember what Epstein was doing. Who were the people he was funding? Joe Lieberman, Bill Richardson, both of whom were the vice president, possible vice presidents for Al Gore. He was funding Al Gore. He was funding John Kerry, and John Kerry runs against George H.W. Bush. He's helping out RFK Jr., and RFK Jr. is a potential candidate for the future of presidency, because of course you can spin his ancestry, but his own family don't say nice things about him either. I think people have painted Robert F. Kennedy Jr. as this hero, and it's so simple to do, but that simplistic mainstream media, advert marketing, PR campaigns, it's all fake. Just go and look into him and go, okay, he's just another one. He's a Democrat politician. He'll be a Democrat politician again at some point, because what's going to happen is they're going to manufacture, and this is my full belief that this is predicting the very near future, they're going to manufacture a death of the old party. Nancy Pelosi's half dead. Chuck Schumer can't see properly. Joe Biden isn't there anymore. He's just drug Biden. They just pump him full of stuff and he walks around like a zombie. John Kerry looks like Frankenstein's monster gone moldy. Like all of the old.
Back on them because they broke everything.
Well, yeah. And they need to be got rid of, and then they're going to replace them with this new elite, and that one has to be an antithesis of the old elite in some sense, in some Hegelian sense. There has to be some opposition. There has to be like a feeling that they're reforming the party into something different. I think that's Robert F. Kennedy Jr. in the future. I don't think this time is meant to be his time. I think they're narrative creating at the moment.
And do you think? So you think they're going to try to ride that whole like rebirth of Camelot kind of thing and kind of play off of his uncle and his father and just kind of like that nostalgia of what could have been?
Yeah, basically. But also, they've not got many options. They haven't got many options. If you look at the Democratic Party in general, it's a mess, an extreme mess, and it ideologically is well broken. It's really just this. Both parties are just riddled by the CIA, and have been for donkey's years. Maybe Jimmy Carter and possibly Donald Trump might be the only two who were the least riddled by CIA connections. But other than that, the whole thing seems like an op. It seems like the CIA took charge after they shot Kennedy's uncle in his head, and it's never gone. It's never gone back. That was never allowed to. And people had warned, like previous presidents had warned, that would be the case. So yes, I think he's a prince across the water type business. You know, he's the one that they could constantly say, "Oh, maybe that'll be him." But he has way too many skeletons in his closet. Way too many skeletons. I mean, just Jeffrey Epstein on his own is just way too big a skeleton. So I think they needed to get rid of him and distance him, because they know that over time that will fade. That will. Maybe not 2028, but 2032, they can boost him full of drugs when he can barely speak. And you can barely speak now, but, you know.
Yeah, they'll probably give him some AI synthesized voice or something. Welcome to the new camera.
Yeah, that would make sense. He would. I mean, all of these guys you're talking about that point in 2032. They all got AI polymath things working in their head, telling them what to say. So it's like it's no longer we're no longer in the world we are. That's the world of tomorrow, and it's only like it's on
the corner. It's science fiction is there. We caught up with it. Mm-hmm. Might I ask for you to touch on something particular?
Yeah.
Bill Gates, right? Because I mean, there's a whole treasure trove, and I watched some of your stuff in relation to him. Like, I didn't know who his father was. I didn't know the relations there. I didn't know. I thought Bill Gates. I had this understanding in my head that Bill Gates was just this, you know, rich boy who basically bought out DOS and then Windows, and that's life. But that shit could not be farther from the truth. Could you do, like, I don't know, a synopsis, just kind of run over that a little bit, buddy?
Yeah, I know some of my work. I'm probably gonna come at this from a slightly different angle than I would normally. What I would say is that, first of all, one of my main things was, like, you know, going back through ancestry. People, I watched James Corbett talk about William H. Gates the third, second, and first. So his father and his grandfather, as well as him. And that's really, really interesting. I mean, really, really, really interesting stuff. But it's not my, like, for me, I was like, okay, they're involved in all of the things, nefarious stuff. What about further back? Because it only goes really back to Joseph Stanton Gates. What about how far can I go further back? So a lot of that, I went back and I ended up in the court of Henry VIII. Of course, that's direct line, just the Gates line. That's Sir Jeffery Gates. The first, second, and third were all parts of kings and courts of kings and queens. Jeffrey Gates the third gets his head chopped off on the first day Mary Tudor takes power, and the family go into hiding soon after, and Eustace Gates hides his son. They change their name to Jates for a while with a J, and then they go across to the New World. Stephen Gates the first writes a book about it eventually. They travel across to the New World and setting up in America. All arguing all of the time, and eventually, they're based in where the center of the slave trade is, Rhode Island, at the height of the slave trade, when like 90% of the slaves are going through Rhode Island. And if you lived on Rhode Island, you probably worked in the slave trade to some sort of extent. But I was never able to prove that. That was Israel Gates, who married his cousin as well. So a bit of incest in there. Why not throw in some incest? But what's interesting about Bill Gates is that John Clesack wrote some articles about really, really good guy. He wrote some articles about Barbara Marx Hubbard, and she was very interested. People like that were hanging around with Bill Gates. They're like the transhumanist ideologues of the past who are trying to encourage him on his journey. But it seems like Bill Gates knew who he was very early on and knew his destiny and seemed sure that it was going to work out in whatever way. So he created that destiny. In that sense, he's a very intelligent guy. But it's clear that he spent the 80s trying to work out how to do leadership, and then spent the 90s trying to grab leadership as much as he could, and then spent the rest of the time leading in some way and having the foundations and the organizations there. And what I would say about Bill Gates that would be the best thing I could say that would give people information about him is that this lines up with Klaus Schwab. When I was talking about Klaus Schwab coming back from the World Economic Forum, eventually I talked about the creation of the recreation of what was the Global Leaders for Tomorrow program, which became the Young Global Leaders in 2004. And that's the title we use now. But Global Leaders for Tomorrow, the first year, that was like after the fall of Soviet Russia. They're like all celebrating. Woo-hoo-hoo! Now we can change our name properly to the World Economic Forum, and we can come out. We're not just European. Yum, 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 yum. We're going to take you over. No, we are coming after you now. And so they revealed themselves, and they go into they go into hyperdrive, and they create the Global Leaders for Tomorrow program. And 1993, they run the first Global Leaders for Tomorrow. It's like Angela Merkel, Bill Gates, you've got Richard Branson there, Viktor Orban, Nicolas Sarkozy, Tony Blair, Gordon Brown, all of the leaders who are going to take over soon are the ones who are being trained during that course. I've heard there's multiple sources telling me, and a couple of newspapers articles pointing that there was also by the same people a Russian version of this with just 3 candidates, and one of them was Vladimir Putin, and that was in 1993 as well. So it's like the same people choosing the leaders from the country, but instead of it being like a load of different leaders from around the world, this was like definite Russian selection. So I don't know. I don't know how true that is. I haven't been able to investigate the Russian aspect. But everybody knows about the Global Leaders for Tomorrow. Knows that Bill Gates, Tony Blair, and all of these were involved in the first one. That's no secret at all. And I think that at that point, it's easy to go away and think, oh, well, he's a nefarious bastard put in power by World Economic Forum. But what did he do next? And he started to take Microsoft down this point of doing the same thing, trying to create leadership programs. So Microsoft created a leadership program around this time that was to create young leaders for their business and for other things. But Microsoft were doing a lot of that hidden away. Now, I find it very interesting that when I was researching Elon Musk, I went back to one of his first websites, Zip2Net, and on his biography on there, this was 1997. It says he had previously worked for Microsoft. And that was missing on all of his Wikipedia, all of the history. Everyone mentions that Elon Musk worked for Microsoft or was at Microsoft, had experience at Microsoft. Personally, I think Musk is a result of a Microsoft and Bill Gates inspired young leadership program. And they were marking out people working probably with intelligence agencies, probably IBM hanging around somewhere in the background, helping them out, doing something like that. But they were, I think that during that time, they were training up a lot of the tech pioneers that would come in the future, but they were doing it behind the scenes. So you'll see constantly that the same names come up in training some of these big guys. And so I reckon Elon Musk was, and that this is all speculation, but speculation based on the fact that he once admitted that he worked for Microsoft. Yeah, get. And I got some really like pushback from saying that out loud, but I was just repeating what was on his website. I was just saying, look, he wrote it himself. That's not me writing it. Messenger, you dirty rotten gits. But there was a load of people, and one person said, oh yeah, he once talked about how he did a little bit of code for Microsoft. And was like, I don't know if he's talked about it that much, or he's just like tried to like sweep it under the carpet. Oh yeah, I wrote a bit of code. But in actual fact, he was completely and utterly complicit with whatever they were doing, because I mean, all of these guys, before I talked to you, I was I'm terrible at this. I was talking for about 3 hours on another podcast, and we were talking about a lot of stuff like Musk and things. All of this is contrived, you know. All of this, we think these people just come suddenly. They just appear, but they don't just suddenly appear.
It's right, like
yeah,
the front men. That's really what they are. There's front corporation, and there's front men.
It's really simple, and they're very. It's very easy to see why they get selected, and they also very easy to see that they become untouchable. And I mean, Bill Gates. By the time when you're reading through his speeches in the mid-90s, I did a lot of that. I read through all of Bill Gates' speeches through the 90s and was like, there's just no point in talking about Bill Gates at all. He's just repeating the lines. They're not even his lines. People think they're his lines, but this has been given to him by a load of people before. And he is just a front man. He doesn't know what's going on. That kind of like cut off. That's a lot of the time as well why I like to go back in time rather than just hang around in the present or the near past. I like to go back really far. It teaches a lot more about people, but also makes people very small. So you no longer like put your own, like give them power that they think they deserve. And Bill Gates thinks he deserves power. And I don't know what that power is for. What, for stealing technology from people? Him and Nathan Mervoyd were terrible at doing that. They were just stealing from everybody. That's how they made their living. Made their millions, their billions, whatever.
Wasn't Gates' dad a pretty big shot? Because the guy who started Starbucks talked about how Gates' dad is the guy who got him the funding and the backing and all that, which I found interesting because I had no idea his dad was anybody important or of significance prior to that.
Yeah, they were heavily involved in healthcare, dash eugenics, dash, population control stuff. They were very like wealthy. You see, the Gates family was very wealthy all over the place, but that part of the Gates family left most of the Gates family that it had grown up around and moved across to the West Coast up to Washington way, and so they had made they had been successful there. But in the same way, they were never never as successful as Bill Gates would become in the eyes of many. Whether that to be a front man for an organization will be seen as successful in times to come. He's a highway robber, a digital highway robber, a really early digital highway robber, robbing all of the technology from other people. And is
Sorry. Do you
I,
think, especially with like Microsoft, because when he was coming up, right, computers are coming to the thing, right, and they're bringing that to the forefront, right, and as you can imagine, Uncle Sam and intelligence agencies would, like that's valuable, right, to know what's going on out there, and do you think that that's part of what they were using him for, is kind of like to to set up that infrastructure for, to be the major entity, to make sure like something like Linux was not going to be able to run wild, you know what I mean, to kind of form the box, I guess is what I'm trying to figure
yeah.
out.
Well, there's a lot happening in the 80s. Usenet was a really important step. The Usenet was kind of a test to see what the internet would be like. They'd already in like the early 80s realized that something like the internet was going to happen. What the format would be and how it would win out was tested through Usenet, which was like the original like sort of university dash company intranet. And the people were mapping out the future. So I do a lot of work about Herman Kahn's work mapping out the future in the year 2000 and stuff. His document, which predicts all of the technologies that's coming in the future, and some of it is, and some of it's been achieved, some of it's almost achieved, and a load of it we know we're heading towards. So they were pretty accurate. By the 60s, 70s, 80s, they're using game theory really well. By the mid 80s, they're using computers for game theory, and the whole thing is changing. The analytics is changing the game. Whether or not it actually changed the game, it gave people the probabilities much better, and there's new organizations being set up. So to explain about what we're talking about here, I had written an article called David Shaw and the Rise of Jeff Bezos. And it shows basically that D. Shaw in the mid 80s, about 86, while all of this stuff is happening, when they're trying to map out what the next stage is going to be, sets up in New York. Eventually, it would become like 10% of the New York Stock Exchange. It was so powerful. It was that powerful at some point, D. Shaw. And it's set up in the upstairs in an old communist bookstore. And they created this company, which was really like a young global leaders for tech companies.
Okay.
There had been no sort of leadership program for tech that would satisfy what the internet's going to become, and would fill that they realized very quickly on Usenet that the internet was going to be a big thing, and that everything that we do in real life, like buying stuff in the shop and stuff, was about to transfer over online over the next few decades. How that was going to look, they don't know, but they're gonna map it out slowly. So they went into these places, and if you listen to descriptions of D. Shaw, it's like the trading floors were usually people were like shouting and screaming into telephones. And this was silent, quiet, everybody looking at computers, everybody discussing quietly, like the numbers. And it was a new way of doing everything. It changed everything, but it also meant D. Shaw recruited in a different way. They brought people in and they said, "You're the best. What do you want to do? What's best for you?" and they'd find the best place for people that way. Instead of giving them a job, or people applying for a job, a certain specific job, they apply for the job and they both worked out what they would be best at doing and then put them to doing that task. So it was a very efficient way to get a very powerful, clever, but people with really big potential to reach that potential as quickly as possible. So David Shaw was a great mind. He recruited Jeff Bezos and Hazley Minor as two of them, who were then to work together. Jeff Bezos would eventually become vice president and would be acting president at one point at D.E. Shaw before he creates the Amazon narrative. Because what they're doing there in this place is that the internet hasn't been created, even announced yet. They know what's coming. They know what to expect. They're testing out. They're gaming it out. Hazley Minor and Jeff Bezos are hanging around in offices together in the back of D Shaw, and they're running through different ways to try and understand what's coming next and what is needed to be created. And eventually, they make the jump. Once Tim Berners-Lee has announced that he has invented the World Wide Web, then they start to create the first things that are going to be the most important things. Amazon, the place to buy and sell, the marketplace, the digital marketplace in that sense. Slightly different to eBay, of course, and it was always going to have a tiny bit of competition early on. But this idea installs straight away. He creates this narrative. We bought a second-hand car and we went round. His wife was also at D.E. Shaw at that time. So they both go and go around in this station wagon the family helped to purchase so they could sell the books out of the back of the wagon. And in actual fact, they're creating Amazon, and it's within 5 years, he's the richest man with a business on the World Wide Web. And Jeff Bezos is on the cover of Time magazine, and he's getting into business with Sotheby's. Well, of course, Ghislaine Maxwell and Jeffery Epstein are searching around on there, and Taubman and Wexner are on the board of Sotheby's. You know, all mixing with the same people.
Full circle, huh?
Yeah, and Hazley Minor, he sets up download.com, of course, because the two things you're going to need: a marketplace and a place to download software. And so they were just filling up the places, and they still do it now. They're just filling up the spaces of things they know coming that we didn't know coming. If you had, in 1987, 1988, 1989, if you had asked people about what the World Wide Web would look like, they'd be like, what the hell are you, what words are you even saying to me? I don't even know what this language is. I don't know. It was that no one knew. And they were being trained up for what no one knew. That is like how it works. That's the way it works. You don't even know that they've co-opted it. And they've co-opted it years before it's even
the foundation and educating people for the future that they're going to present. That is insane.
Yeah, it's insane. It's an insane example of how it works. It's just, you know, it's not even that difficult. If you can have, and this is really important. If you can have confidence, if these people can have confidence that eventuality will become reality, then they will put everything behind it, and they will be sure of it. We don't. That's what separates us and them, very much so in this sense. So we don't. We see something, and this is the other side. You know what I'm talking about with this? This is the other side. We don't feel that. We don't feel the confidence that we can have that sort of power over other people, that we have the belief that we know better than other people, that other people can't make up their own mind, that we will force something upon other people, that we will tell them what they do. We don't have that. That, like, half of the world isn't like that, and half of the world is like that. And the top echelons of like that are these people who are running the world, who are controlling all of these people. They can do that. They can tell, they have the confidence to say, I know that's going to be, we're going to make it so. we don't have that confidence. We got to learn how to gain that confidence in other different ways to do other different things, but we often do it half-assed. And when I'm talking we and them, I think everybody knows it's like it's basically as good as evil. hate to be trying to call myself good and going in with a good party, but it's either good or evil. Either you're doing really bad stuff, or you're trying to do really good stuff, or there's anything in between. And there's a load of nuance in the center of people who are extremely confused and don't know what's good and don't know what's bad because they've never been taught it anyway. And these guys are all working on an agenda which is about controlling you before you even know you're being controlled. And then it seems esoteric because you're explaining to people, oh, they knew Jeff Bezos was going to be the head of Amazon before the creation of the internet. That just really does sound like a conspiracy theory.
Like, oh yeah, they could read the mind. Okay.
Yeah, but I mean, they can. It's a real simple thing. They've got they
on the board, and wow.
This cat is the worst cat I've ever experienced in my life. I do not like this cat at all. If anybody wants the cat, I will send it to them. Yeah. Yeah, it's hard, man. It's hard. I spend a lot of time trying to be positive. Because a lot of this stuff sounds like it's negative, and I know loads of people who like they worry about whether or not this will have mental issues with myself, where I will have issues because I'm always looking at bad stuff, and maybe that always makes me look at things negatively. But I don't feel that. I feel that there is it's easy to define good and evil. It's easy to define right and wrong. If you look at it and you have some sort of empathy, a lot of the time, the things that these people would do, you'd never do in a million years. And that includes having the confidence to plan out our future for us. And that's what this is. That's nearly every single bit of my research has been about. People who are planning out what is best for us without our knowledge. And I think that's probably the majority of what I investigate.
That is awesome, man. I mean, you gave me a good wow moment because I got the control concept, but I never really fleshed it out in the manner of no, they're actually moving the pieces so far ahead into the future, and then also putting the people there. I mean, that's a pretty critical piece to really kind of understand and take in, man. And that's probably the biggest thing I got out of that was, I mean, but it makes sense. It has to work that way, right?
They write it down. They write it down. Listen, let me. I got it open because I was doing something with it earlier. I got my other glasses. I'm going to take these glasses off. Here we go. I'm going to take my cool glasses off. Just sitting on my head now. I'm going to put on my reading glasses and become a gentleman. But just looking over a document which is on crummy.com, and it's from the year 2000, which was the year 2000, a framework for speculation on the next 3 years by Herman Kahn and Anthony J. Weiner. Not the same Anthony Weiner as got his Wiener Boy Weiner, different Anthony Weiner. I'm not sure if they're related, to be honest. I haven't checked. It was published in 1967. The guy on this site says it's really really interesting. It is. It's one of the most interesting documents of all time. The Hudson Institute mapped out our entire future. Even stuff we haven't got to yet. Even stuff me and you haven't thought about is mapped out. They already know. So some of the technologies that were predicted that hadn't been attained then but they had predicted this in this document include extreme high strength or high temperature structural materials, new or improved super performance fabrics, new or improved materials and equipments and appliance course, more reliable and long range weather forecasting. Well, debatable. New and useful plant and animal species. I think there's a liger nowadays, isn't there? Was that before? Anyway, general use of automation and cybernation in management and production. Okay, we can see these. These are all like things that we understand. Automated, universal, real-time credit, audit, and banking systems. My God, that's what we've got now. And they predicted this in 1967. And so we say, oh, it's simple, inexpensive home recording and playing. They were that's fine. But then there's a load of stuff that is almost been achieved as well. New techniques for preserving or improving the environment, inexpensive design and procurement of one-of-a-kind items through use of computerized analysis and automated production. Oh, that's what we're going in. And new techniques for very cheap and convenient and reliable birth control, improved capability to change sex of children and adults. There's so many things. Recoverable boosters for economic space launching, commercial extractions of oil and shale. Most definitely. Home education via video and computerized and programmed learning. Oh, it's almost like what we're going through now. And this keeps going on. Extensive genetic control for plants and animals. All of these things are things that we're experiencing now. And then there's the other things that we haven't experienced. So there's like major improvements in earth moving and construction, new techniques for keeping physically fit. But what about inexpensive road-free and facility-free transportation? What does that mean? I don't know. And suspended animation. What about almost complete control of marginal changes in heredity? Major rejuvenation and or significant extension of vigor and lifespan, say 100 to 150 years, chemical or biological control of character or intelligence. Automated highways, we can see that coming. Extensive use of moving sidewalks for local transportation. Verification of some extrasensory phenomenon. These are what they already predicted. This is what they already, this is what they already put forward in 1967. These are the type of things that we can expect in the future. And at the moment, people like Klaus Schwab went through ticking these things off one by one. People like D.E. Shaw went through ticking these things off one by one. The next generation gets handed down this template of these are the technologies we're most likely to get close to. Which one do you want to be involved in? And then they go and do it. Now we're in a state of AI and anything goes, and things are changing really rapidly. And the next 5 years, you can't even go 5 to 10 years. It's the next 2 to 5 years is going to be things are going to become indistinguishable from magic. And that's 5th generation warfare will go into full swing and no one will know what's going on anymore. There could be a fundamental collapse in systems that have been built now because it will be so hard to defend yourself, the infrastructure against what is being created. So, we're heading towards a place where these people have predicted the future, like each generation predicts the future. You go back further than 1967, you go back to what people like Orwell and Huxley were doing. They were predicting the future. They were predicting our political futures. They were predicting the dynamics at play, whether they're dramatic in one sense here or one sense there. They're going to be accurate in one sense here or one sense there too. So it's just like, the whole story of people inventing the future is no new thing. It's always been done. People have visions. The visions are made up of all of the tools they have available to them at that time and the potential advanced tools. Now we are at a point where we could lose grasp of reality in ways that are detrimental for humankind. And that's been one of the first times in history where that is so.
And we're right at the cusp of that, right? We got in that one last WEF meeting where they're talking about, you know, monitoring and interpreting your brain waves for like work production and intelligence and interrogation. I mean, what's safe at that point, right? And at what point does it get to something where if I just want to surveil you, that I can't just kind of zap you from over here and basically, you know, like figure out what I need to figure out or shut you up, whatever need be. I mean, it's getting to that level, you know.
There's something even bigger coming, and I mean, what you see is the rise of AI, and at some point, AI is going to be so good that have you already seen what's happening? I mean, Ukraine, you've got a drone that just comes in, boom, evaporates someone. You know, I was saying it earlier. I think the great evisceration is coming. This moment where there's going to be two armies who use AI technology, drone warfare, and other things against each other, and it's just going to be devastating. There will be no rules to the engagement. It'll be as bad as World War One. The first war with a new technology always leads to extreme tragedy and extreme death. So World War One, there was the use of, for the first time, chemical weaponry, the use of machine guns, the use of big bombs and artillery in a way that had never really been even imagined before. So that led to just mass slaughter on a mass scale. The Second World War, U-boats, plane technologies, but also nuclear technology, atomic bomb. We know what come. This one is things that can eviscerate people. The next one is swarms that you won't even see. So I can't see how like with these people in charge, with these people who are the leaders of our society, made so by leadership programs they create themselves, I can't see how we won't end up with the great evisceration or the great evaporation, whatever you want to call it, where a human is one moment there and is no longer there anymore, because it's happening around us right now. And second to that is the idea that this, you know, war is perpetual limited warfare right now. It was like that before World War One as well. Before, like World War One and World War Two suddenly became out of control war that could lead to grand all-out nuclear warfare, and that would be devastating. So Kissinger and others created perpetual limited warfare and said, oh, let's now go forward where we agreed to kill each other a little bit rather than a lot. You know, that's the compromise we can come to. We'll shoot each other a little bit. At first, John Foster Dulles and others were saying, we'll just use the little atomic bombs, not the big atomic bombs. That's how perpetual, how limited, like the scale limited was to them. So that was decided in about 1957 with nuclear weapons and foreign policy being written by Henry Kissinger, yeah? But before that, you could say that humans have always had perpetual limited warfare. And it was just returning it to the state that it was before World War One. Because before World War One and biological, chemical weapons, all different types of weapons, machine gun fire, you know, plane technology, zeppelins, all of this crazy stuff that happened in World War One that was a consequence of the Industrial Revolution. Before, it'd always been pikes and swords, and your army was defeated and everybody else would run off, and then, you know, you'd catch the other army and then you'd be like, all right, then now you go back home, and they'd go back home. And, you know, they'd maybe meet up again. They all had rules. It was perpetual limited warfare. You go back thousands of years, it was just perpetual limit. No one had the technology to make it not limited. The only difference between humans using perpetual limited warfare all throughout history has been this great boost in technology all of a sudden, and then the agreement not to use that technology. AI, we've got no such agreement. So we're reaching a point where as AI come in and drone technologies come in, missile technology becomes better, there is no rules of engagement written down. There is no warnings. There's nothing you can do to stop what a test ground looks like for a new technology. which is always, when it's going to be applied into military technology, is always going to be devastating beyond understanding when it's first introduced in proper warfare. We're already seeing, I mean, some of those videos of people just like standing in a bunker, and then you see this drone come in and then it's gone.
Yep.
It's just a puff of smoke, man. Indistinguishable from magic. In reality, that's AI will be indistinguishable from magic on the screens. You'll be in rooms full of people in 20 years' time who none of them are real. There'll be rooms full of bots that don't know they're in rooms full of bots. It will be so complicated that not even the bots will know that they're bots or not. You know, the future in that way in the digital sphere is already completely unreal and indistinguishable from magic. But when a human can just disappear in a puff of smoke in the real world as well, that's just like we're entering into a time where it's like, okay, that do people really realize what that means? War comes further than the front line. So there has to be some form of continued agreement of perpetual limited warfare, or there has to be the AI war that is the war of evisceration that just just like loads of people just explode. There you go. You don't even hear it coming. Maybe it'll still be, the technology will still be poor enough that you'll hear that buzz that they're hearing in Gaza or Palestine all the time of the drones that are going to just come down and eviscerate you.
That's spooky to think about, man. And you're right. I think you're right. You know, it all makes sense. I mean, and look where we are with AI. Most people don't realize like AI has been around since what, like 1984, something like that, right?
That's a nice number.
Yeah. Funny enough, right? So, and I know by like the 90s we already had like basic language models and whatnot, right? So I can only imagine through, you know, back in the day when they had Carnivore and all these other intelligence programs, what it was running off of and what we must have, let alone what we know we have now. So where we can be in, like you said, 2 years, 4 years, 5 years is, yeah, it is kind of magic, isn't it?
Yeah, it's kind of like going like this. It's like about to be hit by the truck face is what I get when I look into AI. And like at some point, like, I mean, when I was that's the thing, when I was doing the research into the first time I entered into the Epstein field was with Younkerman and looking at Carbine 911, and Carbine 911 gets in between you and the police. So you call the police, and instead of getting a policeman on the other end of the phone, you get Carbine 911. They'll send out a drone and use total surveillance from cars and from street cameras and from cameras on houses to follow someone and track someone that the system has said is probably a pre-criminal. That's the type of stuff where you're like, okay, now I'm entering into a new world, and they're all Israeli intelligence who are running this company. It all just seems just insane. Then during COVID, those people get contracts in loads of places. New Orleans was one of the places that got run by, like some parts of it got run by Carbine 911 during that. These things are happening. They're real. They're all around us. They're going to use total surveillance, and eventually they're going to be able to say who lives, who dies, who's right, who's wrong. Same thing happened all throughout history, over and over again. At some point, someone says, all right, well, these people are wrong and these people are right. That's the right way to do it, and that's the wrong way to do it. That's what happens in every genocide. It's just like, oh no, you're reading the wrong thing, comrade. Uh-oh, gulag time for you. You know, every single, your hooting out Indian song, like you're gonna get eviscerated. This is a past that we do over and over again. We look for the thing that we can. This trending causes emotion, and humans use it to manufacture consent for war and genocide. And we're going to do it again and again and again. But AI now.
You know, that might be a good point for us to end it. I know we've been on for about 2 hours. I don't want to eat up your night either. Hopefully, we can do one of these again. I did notice, by the way, when we started, we just kind of went up, and so before we go, like first, tell everybody who you are initially, where they can find your work, right? Like, because we just skipped all that and just like had fun and just went in, which I appreciate because that's awesome. But
Hmm.
I also want people to know and have an understanding of, well, now they know your body of work and whatnot, but you know, like where can they find information about you? Where can they?
Well, hello, my name is Johnny Vedmore, and I am an investigative journalist, and I'm a researcher, and I'm a radio show host now. I host Drive Time in the UK between 5 and 7 on TNT Radio. Yeah. Today's news talk with Johnny Vedmore. I quite like that whole thing. I run a site called newspaste.com, and newspaste, I make loads of content. Listen, I just don't stop making content, and I write the theme tune, and I do all the graphics, and I do, everything. I create documentaries. I've got loads of projects in the go, got loads of shows. You should watch Newshound. You should watch any of the Johnny Vedmore read throughs. If you don't want to consume the long form articles that are sometimes 7,500 words or 15,000 words, I read them all. I try and go through reading them all out, so you can hear them all in different ways. I have loads of stuff going on. You can find me at johnnyvedmore.com as well. I write for a load of places, and I hope just to keep creating content after content, so that all has a significant point, so that people in the future will find it as important as the people do now. And that's basically what I try and do with my work, is make sure that it's not going to be like you could read it in 10 years time and it'll still have the same form of emotional impact, or you'll get the sense of what it's meant to tell you in that time. So support my work and stuff. I'm just out there doing as much as possible and enjoying it. I'm enjoying it. Doing this sort of work, reporting on intelligence and stuff. There is a fear of death, yes, but don't be driven by that. Try and be a bit positive. So I do a load of different things, including getting out and about and doing police auditing and stuff as well. So I mean, you just look on my YouTube or Rumble or Rockfin or whatever. Follow me on Twitter on @JohnnyVedmore. I am constantly trying to communicate with everybody who communicates with me. That sounds it's getting harder and harder, but I want to keep in contact with people. That includes, if you listen to the radio show, come weekdays, it's like noon in Eastern time, I think. And it's you get in the chat and we'll have a good conversation. I got good guests coming on every day. I am a workhorse. I will keep working. I love the fact that you're spreading out the work of people like myself, Ian Carroll and stuff. This is like massively important. And there's loads of people who I love for doing the same. I'd be happy to come on again and again. Like,
I would
yeah.
love to just pull the string and let you go, brother. Like, there's just so much information. It's easy for me to just sit here and listen to you because there's just, I don't know, it's like a waterfall, it just keeps going and going, and there's so much awesome substance.
You either like it or you don't. That's what I'll say.
And on that note as well, I completely appreciate you. I mean, I'm a small guy, so it's not like I'm some major hitter like a lot of people out there. And the fact that you were willing graciously from the get go, like, yeah, dude, I'll talk to you, and I mean, it's so easy to set up the time with you. Like, I appreciate that. I just want to let you know that. And before we shut down.